Welcome to the first webinar that the Center for Studies in Social Sciences is hosting. We may encounter a few glitches. If we do, please bear with us. I will follow our normal seminar format by simply introducing the speaker first, and then asking him to take over and talk for the duration of his paper, which should be about 40 to 45 minutes. Karthik, yeah. Here's the introduction. Today's speaker is Karthik Ram Manoharan, who is presently Assistant Professor of Political Science at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta. His research interests include political theory, post-Marxism, identity politics, Fanon studies, and the Dravidian movement. He teaches a number of courses here at the center. These include the vocabulary of the social sciences, rethinking political theory, and the introduction to modern social thought. He is also the author of a book titled Frantz Fanon, Identity and Resistance. This has been published by Orient Black Swan in 2019, and the co-editor of a volume titled Rethinking Social Justice, which was also published by Orient Black Swan in 2020. He has a number of articles and research publications. I will mention only three. Anti-Casteist Casteism, a Fanonist critique of Ramaswamy's discourse on caste. This was published in Interventions in 2016. Counter Media, Tamilnet and the Creation of Meta-Narratives from Below. This was published in Continuum, the Journal of Media and Cultural Studies in 2019. And in the latest, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is In the Path of Ambedkar, Periyar and the Dalit Question. This appeared in South Asian History and Culture in April 2020. He writes regularly for the EPW and Wire and many other forums. He is going to be speaking to us today on a very, very relevant topic, Reading Fanon Now, Black Lives Matter and Further. So Karthik, over to you.
Thank you very much for organizing this series of webinars. I mean, it's been a bit depressing being cooped up and being unable to connect with the people out there, especially with fellow academics and students. So I'm really happy that CCCC has taken this initiative for us to get together and have a discussion. I'm sure most of you, but first of all, let me just convey my hopes that all of you are safe and healthy and everyone around you are aware of the thing which is erupting in US and most parts of the West, the Black Lives Matter movement. This, as you guys would know, erupted after the police murder of George Floyd, a black man who was detained and treated very brutally. He was kneeled upon, he was choking, and he was murdered as he was saying the words, "I can't breathe," right? So these three words, "I can't breathe" and "Black Lives Matter," have become the slogan of a very sort of popular uprising that is taking place in America and which has also spread to some other parts of Europe now. So we might know that not so long back, there was this person called Frantz Fanon who theorized a lot on black resistance, right? So he was one of the theorists who had this highly penetrating insights on racism, its psychological causes and consequences, and the sort of traumas that it can inflict on racialized subjects, right? But more importantly, Fanon also was not willing to take identity as granted. He was willing to challenge the limits of identity and what it means to be a member of a racialized subject, right? So he wasn't willing to take either the white race or the black race for granted, right? So he believed that there was always something beyond the racial identity. But does it make sense to talk about post-racial identity now, right? So at a time when after so many years of protests, so many police reforms, so many measures of affirmative action, you still have wanton killings of black citizens in the so-called democratic West. Can we really say that we have reached a post-identity phase? Or does even talking about a post-identity phase, is it even desirable, right? So some of these things are being debated as we speak, and I'll come to what's going on with the current Black Lives Matter movement as I reach the conclusion of my presentation. But now I'll just jump into the conclusion and provide sort of an outline of Frantz Fanon's humanism, which shaped his approach to identity politics as such. And I'll connect that to the ongoing Black Lives Matters promise. Okay. So Frantz Fanon, like Jean-Paul Sartre, was greatly inspired by the works of Alexandre Kojève, whose reading of Hegel was decisive for shaping the thoughts of several French intellectuals of the generations, right? So Sartre, Lacan, Bourdieu, Hippolyte, Frantz Fanon, Simone de Beauvoir, all of these guys were shaped by Kojève's reading of Hegel. Now, Kojève, in a Hegelian reading, says that a human being is self-conscious the moment she or he says I. So what is I? I is a person's sense of self at a particular time, in particular circumstances, which they share in common with one set of people and do not share with others. In short, I, when you say I, it is the starting point of identity. Aristotle famously said that to be aloof from society, one must be either an animal or a god. Now, one can make a similar observation about identity, that, to say that you are above identity, one must be either an animal or a god, right? It's because identity is always social. It is not possible for an individual to have an identity that is exclusive to her or him, that is uniquely personal and aloof from and above society. So when I claims an identity, it is always in relation to someone else. Or I becomes an identity only when it has a sense of we. This is what William Connolly means when he says that identity is relational and collective. Now, how does Fanon approach identity? What are his normative contours? And how does he resolve the tensions between the particular and the universal? Right? Now, Fanon, taking from Kojève, explicitly addresses the Hegelian theme of recognition, that is, the dialectic of the master and the slave, in Black Skin, White Masks. To recognize the other without being recognized by him is the basic of the Hegelian schemata of the master-slave dialectic. In the beginning of the dialectical process, the master is in a privileged status because by virtue of force and violence, he has been recognized by the slave. The master's humanity is recognized as universal and absolute. Likewise, the master's humanity necessarily rests on a progressive dehumanization of the slave. That is, the master is master only by the fact of having a slave who recognizes him as master. The slave works for the master without being recognized. Yet, it is through this work that the seeds of self-consciousness are sown. And if at all the slave needs recognition, he needs to risk his life and overcome the fear of death through a fight with the master. Now, since the master has laid claim to universality by virtue of domination, the slave, through the fight, seeks the recognition of his particularity in an abstract universality. That is, the slave is not just content with attributing a value to himself, he wants this particular value, his own, to be recognized by all men universally. So, in other words, when someone is fighting for the recognition of blackness, right? So, when someone is fighting for the recognition of blackness, they don't want this blackness to be just something unique to the black individual, but they want it to be recognized universally and respected for. Now, Frantz Fanon echoes this sentiment when he says, and I quote him, "He who is reluctant to recognize me opposes me. In a savage struggle, I am willing to accept the convulsions of death, invincible dissolution, but also the possibility of the impossible." But what Fanon is talking about here is not a plea for multicultural tolerance or fair treatment by the law. Now, Peter Houdis notes that recognition for Hegel as well as for Fanon is about more than acknowledging an individual's formal equality before the law. It is instead a demand to be recognized for the dignity and the worth of one's being. But what complicates Fanon's perspective is that he takes Hegel a step further and contextualizes Hegel with respect to the black racial situation by adding the dimension of the colored slave. With a Sartrean analysis, Fanon notes that the black man is created by the gaze of the white man. The white person who possessed material superiority also possessed an epistemological superiority, which gave him power not just to make the slave work for the master's interest, but also to define the slave as black, to determine the paradigms of discourse under which the slave's identity was structured. Thus, white identity, whiteness, becomes the standard towards which the black person aspires. In this world of becoming, in a society characterized by unequal relationships between racially marked social groups, becoming white becomes becoming human for the black person. While the white man is recognized without recognizing in return, it is the black person who needs recognition from the white man. And this is why Fanon claims that the black man undergoes a process of lactification. Lactification. The white identity is the legitimizing identity which the master wields by virtue of his material and epistemological power. Even when the white colonial master talks about man or humanity, he is referring only to his own image. And even when the white master frees the colored slave and abolishes the material conditions of slavery, the unequal relationship persists because, to Fanon, the Negro slave is one who has not fought or risked his life for freedom. When the black is given freedom as a gift by the white master, it mutilates the process of reciprocal recognition, because mere recognition in a colonial context does nothing to alter the living condition, both economic and psychic, of the black person. Since there was no proper struggle, the black person seeks to further mutilate themselves by imitating the white master or entering into the particularist solipsism of negritude. Without the process of ethical reciprocal recognition, the black person is torn between the myth of a superior white humanity and the myth of a pristine and pure black past. The politics of black experience, for all its claim to separatism, was still functioning in the discursive paradigm set by the white. Now, as Hegel observes in his Logic, the one who flees is not yet free, for in fleeing, he is still dependent on what he flees. To Fanon, both white liberalism and black identitarianism are just attempts to reform the system. A man who has not experienced the fear of death and waged a fight to death for recognition is bound to the existing world and at best only attempts to reform it. But considering the given world is the world of the master and the master's version of humanity or universality, it is only the revolutionary overcoming of the existing world that can free the slave and consequently satisfy him. So in Fanon's view, both assimilating into white culture and romanticizing a black past were mere reformist attempts, not a radical rupture with the status quo. To some extent, the politics of negritude can be called the politics of resistance identity because it contests the inferior status conferred onto the blacks by the whites in power. And it calls on the blacks to take pride in themselves. So you can find the repercussions of this form of thinking even today. For instance, in the slogan, "Black is beautiful," or the celebration of black excellence, or this idea that, there should be more black people in the fashion industry and modeling and so on and so forth, right? So negritude and the sort of associated thought processes that followed had a belief in the uniqueness of black particularity. To Fanon, however, negritude was a passing phase in the dialectic and not an end in itself. A pitfall of negritude was that in its attempts to reject white racist definitions, it over-identified with an imagined Negro authenticity and Negro past, leading Fanon to comment that the term Negro was only a cultural term that had no historical or sociological basis. Further, he writes, and I quote him, "When one says Negro people, one systematically assumes that all Negroes agree on certain things, that they share a principle of communion. The truth is that there is nothing a priori to warrant the assumption that such a thing as a Negro people exists." An identity to Fanon cannot conjure up mythical and pristine paths, but must be historicized. Likewise, a politics that emanates from identity must not be based on unique communal experiences of the past, but with a vision for the future. to overcome the master-slave dialectic that existed in the white-black relationship, the whole of the past had to be set aside in the interests of a common future where human beings would be recognized as human beings. And so Fanon says, both whites and blacks, and I quote him, must turn their backs on the inhuman voices which were those of their respective ancestors in order that authentic communication be possible. So he is asking both whites and blacks to transcend their past, right? So he is asking whites to transcend their past of being slave owners and blacks to transcend their past of being slaves. Now, Fanon's consternation with negritude is owing to its excessive emphasis on the uniqueness of the black identity and experience, which only assists compartmentalization of peoples and not a resolution of the conflict. The slave over here in negritude thus resists the master's values, but without providing a value that would overcome the relationship of difference. The prejudice of the black towards his own race was not a path to universal political liberation, but only a vague cultural dialogue that only his or her own hear, or which can be marketed in a multiculturalist setting. Whereas Fanon argues, a people that undertakes a struggle for liberation rarely legitimizes race prejudice. In a sense, Fanon is anticipating debates, contemporary debates on reverse racism, and empathetically states his opposition to any form of racial essentialism. Fanon places his lot on the side of a universalist humanism that he uses as an evaluating standard in his assessment of identity politics. So Fanon's concept of identity politics needed more than a relic of the past, a black mirage, to quote him, to validate itself. Fanon was strongly skeptical of identification with an essentialized, valorized racial identity that claimed validation only through particularity and lived experience. It is in positing an alternative to this, as well as to the white colonial racism that marks itself as the universal face of humanity, that the Fanonian tensions between universality and particularity emerge. Throughout his works, Fanon operates with a Sartrean understanding that particularism can and must claim the status of universality, since to be in perspective necessarily transforms particularism itself into its own perspective, and thus into the measure of everything else. Fanon is actually quite sarcastic against those who focus only on racial and national particularities without taking the next step towards universality. At the same time, he also targets the humanism of Europe for being a facade for imperialism and suggests a new revolutionary humanism in its place. In Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon addresses the problem of the black identity in a francophone scenario. But he also states his goal very clearly at the outset, which is toward a new humanism. To Fanon, this new humanism is necessary because the white man is sealed in his whiteness and the black man is sealed in his blackness. Fanon's first book is not so much about the colonial encounter but it is a psychological inquiry on racism in a sort of a colonial setting which is looming in the background. Now here in Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon places great focus on the agency of the inferior to create his or her own identification in a situation of oppression. Though the black person is overdetermined from without by a racist society, they are nevertheless free to choose who they are and who they identify with and how they frame their politics. Fanon's humanism, however, is not a liberal concept of individual choice or self-discovery. So he's not saying that, oh, look, no matter what oppression, you can choose to be whoever you want. You needn't be black. You can just be anyone else, or so on and so forth, right? On the contrary, he understands the black person's discovery of themselves as a sort of a painful and a protracted process, right? Which involves a conflict for recognition, but recognition as what? This is something which Fanon constantly questions throughout his works, right? As in, it is very important that the black person gained recognition, but as what? In Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon argues that the person does not have the right to be a Negro, nor the duty to be this or that. But as the racialized subject must impose their whole weight as a human being on the racist and check, challenge, and change the oppressor's prejudices. The individual, whether oppressor or oppressed, has one right, that of demanding human behavior from the other, and one duty, that of not renouncing my freedom through my choices. And this radically free subject cannot search for their identity in history, but rather in a common future. So this is the very essence of the Hegelian idea of recognition. And this is also why Fanon is very deeply skeptical about projects that focus more on particularist past than on a common future. Now Fanon says, and I quote him, "The discovery of the existence of a Negro civilization in the 15th century confers no patent of humanity on me. Like it or not, the past can in no way guide me in the present moment." Fanon believes that the black person should not be locked up in their particularist identity and must make a movement towards something larger. When Fanon claims that it is not the particular history of Negro civilization, but the entire history of human civilization that interests him, he also adds that the body of history does not determine a single one of my actions. So Fanon places the onus on the individual's agency in deciding what their identity is, what their identification is, and what their identity politics will be. Two things need to be noted over here. Firstly, to Fanon, the ending of colonialism as a system is an unconditional and a preliminary step to an ethical recognition among people. In all his works, Fanon is uncompromising in his belief that colonialism is an absolute evil and that the colonized need to reject the values of the colonizer. The humanity of the colonized can only materialize after colonialism is done away with. The other thing which is important for Fanon is reciprocal recognition. to provide an ethical premise for universalism. Fanon's ethical recognition requires recognizing the identity of all others. It is a mutuality of recognition which respects difference without erasure or homogenization. However, Fanon is not a cultural relativist because he does not believe that every culture is unique in itself and must be valued for whatever it is. But he actually prefers a switch from moving from a national cultural consciousness to a social and political consciousness. And also for nationalism to be explained, enriched, and deepened, and to be elevated into humanism. So Fanon does not look at anti-colonialism or black resistance as an end in itself. It was a means to an end, an absolutely necessary means only. Now, Fanon believes in what Slavoj Zizek calls the universality for itself. According to Zizek, the universality for itself is not simply external or above its particular context. It is inscribed within it. It perturbs and affects it from within so that the identity of the particular is split into its particular and universal aspects. Now, I am just going to repeat this. The identity of the particular is split into its particular and universal aspects. I'm repeating this because this is a point which I will come back to in my conclusion when I'll talk about the current phase of the Black Lives Matter movements. Fanon's universalism emerges from his deep commitment to anti-colonial resistance and decolonization. But while there is a general valorization of the anti-colonial aspects of Fanon's writings, scholars often overlook Fanon's concern about how the former colony fares after decolonization in its humanizing project. In his essay, This Africa to Come, Fanon explicitly states that colonialisms and its derivatives do not constitute the present enemies of Africa. And Fanon says, and I quote him, I am worried that the greater danger that threatens Africa is the absence of ideology. So while the moment of the colonial encounter is crucially important in shaping the identity of the colonized and their identification with the national project of decolonization or anti-racist resistance, it alone does not justify a politics of the future. To Fanon, a politics of the future would have to transform not just the identity of the oppressed, but also that of the oppressor. Given the ideology of the European colonialist, European universal humanism functions as nothing more than a dishonest ideology. So it was necessary for the colonized to take up this mission as a part of decolonization. So decolonization to Fanon is not merely an ejection of the colonizer, it's not merely a reclamation of national values, but it was a movement towards an international consciousness. And Fanon thus says, for Europe, for ourselves, and for humanity, comrades, we must make a new start, develop a new way of thinking, and endeavor to create a new map. So now coming back to the Black Lives Matter protests, right? So in there was already a phase of the Black Lives Matter protests in 2014, right? So this was when, which was triggered by the killing of Tamir Rice, and there was all this uprising in Ferguson, in Baltimore, and so on and so forth. And what shall I say? There was also this massive outburst in media taking positions against or for this protest which happened in the wake of the Black Lives Matter in 2014. Now, what triggered that? I mean, again, just as in the case of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter protests in that first phase were also triggered by killings of black people by the American police, right? And in the first phase of the Black Lives Matters, you might notice that apart from a section of vocal and university educated white radicals, the protests did not attain much traction, right? Now, commenting on the wake of the violence in Ferguson, which happened in 2014, Slavoj Žižek invoked, Walter Benjamin's critique of violence, and he observed that such outbursts had no concrete programmatic demands and are sustained only by a vague call for justice. But Benjamin's thesis is something a lot more than just, violence without programmatic demands, because Benjamin also conceives of divine violence as something which wreaks a boundless destruction. That is, it wreaks havoc on the concept of barriers and it breaks boundaries, right? So, but however, the first phase of Black Lives Matter, in a sense, only reinscribed boundaries, right? So what happened was that insofar as there was a section of radicalized black youth who were supported by some radical left in the US, the vast majority of the white population were looking at it from a comfortable distance. Now, some of them supported it, some of them were opposed to it, right? And what ultimately happened after that was that they were unable to consolidate any form of popular democratic opposition, and the white working class votes largely went to Donald Trump, right? And we know what happened after that, okay? So there was a sort of a problematic within the Black Lives Matter movement itself, right? So as in there was one part of its particular content and the other part was its universal content, right? So the particular content of Black Lives Matters, of course, is evident from its name itself, right? Black Lives Matter, right? Now, there are some critics who say that, why do you talk about Black Lives Matter? Why not say all lives matter and so on? Which I think is frankly ridiculous, isn't it? As in, just I think there was someone who gave this very intelligent analogy, right? Someone went to a hospital saying that his, the bone in his right hand is fractured. And the doctor tells him all bones matter. So why are you just focusing on your the bones of your right hand? So this sort of a particular articulation of a demand at a certain point of time is absolutely important. So when you say a term like Black Lives Matter, it is both pertinent and poignant, and it speaks directly to the heart of racial oppression, which targets the black people the most in America, right? But there is also a sort of a universal aspect to it. The universal aspect to it is the larger question of recognition, it's a larger question of representation, and a larger question of redistribution of resources, right? So are we just going to talk about black separatism, or are we going to talk about, something larger, concrete, universal forms of reforms, right? So in a sense, Martin Luther King Jr. was absolutely radical, when he argued that it was necessary to overcome black separatism and fight on a universalist plan for all the oppressed in the country, right? So, in fact, one of the last major public protests which Martin Luther King did was the Poor People's March, right? It wasn't a Black People's March, it was done on a more universal platform, trying to bring different communities together and so on and so forth. Right? Having said this, you can't just try to ignore the question of race in America, just as we can't ignore the question of caste in India, right? We have to acknowledge that the police system in several parts of America is absolutely racist. But at the same time, we should also not slip into the quite problematic multiculturalist position of, just endorsing black identity politics without engaging with some of the more substantive demands, right? Because, there is something to be, I don't want to be too cynical when the protests are going on at this moment, but there are some things which are happening which makes us ask certain uncomfortable questions, right? So now you have this massive Black Lives Matters going across, and I think statues of racist white people, Confederate leaders, slave owners, and so on are being brought down in America and in Europe. Columbus, Colston, Rhodes, King Leopold of Belgium, all have seen their statues toppled. That's absolutely fine, insofar as statues are part of history, toppling them is also part of history, right? But there is something else which is going on over here, which is this eagerness, this enthusiasm of big multinational companies, corporations to support the Black Lives Matters protests. Just look at it. Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Google, IBM, L'Oreal, all of these companies are openly campaigning for Black Lives Matters and are, displaying their logos and the Black Lives Matter logos in the factories and so on. And many of these companies have also pledged to increase diversity in their ranks and, hire more Black people, this, that, and so. Now, I'm afraid that what this is going to end up in is not exactly a redistribution of resources, but a redistribution or a diversification of elites, right? So instead of having just, a company where all the CEOs are, rich white men, now you're going to have companies where the CEOs will be, 7 white men, 3 Black men, few white, Black women, Mexican women, and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, the company and its structure is the same, right? So this sort of tokenistic inclusivity seems to be the sort of approach which the establishment is taking towards the Black Lives Matter movement. And importantly, there also needs to be a critique from within the movement of whether it will enable itself to be appropriated by such maneuvers of the establishment, right? Because see, at the end of the day, having Biden as the president, American president, is definitely going to be much better, not just for the Black people, but for everyone else than having Trump in the presidential position. Obviously, there is no question on that. But then again, you already had a Black man as president before Trump came into power. And we must remember that the Black Lives Matters movement happened at a time when Black people were being killed by the police when Obama was the president, right? In fact, there was also the study which actually shows that more Black people were killed by the police under Obama than under Trump, right? So now, if we were to historicize this protest, it's not just about Blacks fighting against racism, but a general sort of a discontent against the Trump regime, to which this Black Lives Matter gave a perfect ammunition, right? But if this change, if this protest has to transform into something more substantial, it has to broaden its horizons and its boundaries, right? It cannot be a question of the minority against the majority, but it has to reconfigure what we mean by minorities and majorities, right? So perhaps by a sort of a cross identity solidarity, or what Lakla would call, this sort of coming together of a people, there can be the possibility of some imagining a new universal form of community to take on and challenge the elites, and not just that, to conceive of and create a new society. So I think I've taken 45 minutes of the time. Shall I wrap it up? Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, Karthik, thank you so much for a very, what turned out to be a very interesting talk, despite my reservations about, what it would be like on the screen. I heard you very well, at least I heard you very well. I hope the participants have heard you well as well. What I will do is, I will try and unmute instead of unmute, I can unmute all actually, and allow questions. But there's disturbance coming in from some of the.
I think it would be better if they type the questions in the chat box and I was able to answer. Would that be better? Yeah.
On the chat. Well, I don't know whether everybody will be able to do that.
Okay,
but if
okay.
wants to ask a question, they can come in now. That's not a problem.
Okay.
Let me start it off, since while we're waiting for people to either type a question or to actually sort of raise the hand. Do I need to? Should I just quickly unmute all? Let me just unmute all, okay? Because
Sure.
I don't know. A lot of people's videos are off, so I won't know if they visually raise a hand or anything. So I hope I'll be able to see the people who want to ask a question. I'm a little worried about that. I'll just general response to what you were saying, which was I know, of course, of your work on Fanon, and we've been following it for some time. But it was interesting to me how you related it to the Black Lives Matter movement that's on everybody's minds right now. So quickly, I'll just ask three broad questions. You can deal with it now or later, or whatever you want. I was interested in, of course, it's a very big question, but in the question of identity that you raised, in the sense that on the one hand, you're saying Fanon is disagreeing with negritude, saying when he says that identity must be historicized. But on the other hand, he is saying further that you cannot search for identity in history, but in a common future. So I was interested to relate the comments you made on Fanon and Fanon's articulations on identity, to relate that to the Black Lives Matter issue that's in front of us now, and to ask perhaps a banal question, but to ask the question in relation to statues. So how, I mean, of course, I know Fanon didn't write on statues, but how would you figure he would, how would you figure, there's no point in asking what you might think Fanon might have said, but how do you figure identity to be emblematized in the person of a cast iron statue, in the sense that not just as an emblem or an icon of something hated and therefore to be pulled down, but in what way, if any at all, it impacts on Fanon's own understanding of identity, in his own comment that you cannot search for identity in history, because it seems to me the statues are identity in history. In a sense. So that was one. The other was, of course, his visceral reaction to colonialism and his well-known sort of dictum that you need to reject colonialism and his values, and all of that needs to disappear before anything can happen. But how would that play out in relation to neocolonialism was the question in relation to today. Just these broad questions, Karthik, but let's see whether we can collect from other people as well first. And if anybody has typed, can you see if anyone has typed a question? No, I can't.
Can I answer your questions till then?
Sure. And while answering, if anybody's video pops up, I will enable that. So whoever wants to ask a question, please sort of, appear on the screen and I'll unmute you. Or send chat, whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So now, see, as regarding the statues, what would Fanon have said, right? See, I mean, there are, again, there are two aspects in which this entire debate on statues is being framed at the moment, right? At least by reading what's being discussed in, British newspapers, American newspapers, and so on. Firstly, firstly, there's the general question of, do you want to celebrate, honor, or have monuments to really nasty people in public? Right?
Yeah.
As in, someone like, obviously someone like Columbus or Colston are quite King Leopold are very, very nasty people. Do we want to honor them in public? I think that is one aspect of the debate. Now, when the debate is framed in that sort of a manner, perhaps we could look at, the bringing down of these statues or, relocating them as a sort of a work of history in progress itself, right? This is not necessarily a way of rectifying history, but of creating it, by saying that no longer are we going to respect such figures who held such opinions and so on, right? But having said that, there is also another manner in which the debate is being framed, is that the presence of these statues is causing post-traumatic stress disorder to people of color in United States and UK and Belgium, wherever, right? I think this is a very dangerous way of framing the debate, because anything can cause this sort of stress to anyone. I mean, the Hindus could claim that Babri Masjid caused them stress, right? The presence of the Babri Masjid is causing them stress, and that's why they pulled it down. Or the Taliban could claim that the Bamiyan Buddha caused them stress and they pulled it down. This is a completely, what shall I say? This is something which cannot be concretized as any form of a demand, and just flows into some glorification of one's own victimhood, and the assumption that victimhood alone becomes the right criteria for placing, these sort of demands. I think Fanon would have completely disagreed with the second manner in which this debate is being framed, that, the presence of some statue is going to cause you injury and whatever and so on. But on the first part, I think both built statues and, statues which are being relocated, it's been happening throughout history, right? So I don't see something necessarily problematic with, Colston's or Columbus statue being removed from their pedestals and being moved somewhere else. I don't think it's anything problematic, and perhaps it could also be encouraged, provided the discourse is framed properly. I think that's what Fanon would have said. Now, as regards neocolonialism, Fanon, I think he already gives his indications of his apprehensions about neocolonialism in Wretched of the Earth, right? Because he is already talking about the new elite, right, in the colonies, who do not have the sort of organic growth which the European bourgeoisie had, but are likely to mimic them or imitate them in their practices, and could possibly be even more dangerous for the natives than the colonizers themselves, right? So I think perhaps he was, though he was unwilling to admit it, Fanon was a witness to some very violent sectarian feuds within the FLN, which the Algerian Liberation Front, which led to the murders and mass assassinations of several progressive people, some of whom were close friends of Fanon, like Aban Ramdan. this leader with some broad socialist sort of thinking. He was assassinated by the Algerian nationalists. Now, Fanon, I think he was very apprehensive about this, what would happen in post-colonial Algeria under this sort of organization. But since he was part of this organization and more or less its spokesperson, he didn't want to criticize it openly. But if we read between the lines of Wretched of the Earth, I think he was hinting that FLN, once Algeria is free, would function within a sort of a neo-colonial political economy and act perhaps as brutally as how the colonizers did. And that did come to pass.
Okay, Karthik, thanks so much for that. Parthoda has been waiting. There are two other questions that have been typed into the chat from Ananya Mahapatra and Barshana Basu. But I will give the floor to Parthoda, then the two questions that have been typed out on chat. I'm sure you can see the chat questions anyway. So, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Karthik, thank you very much. I'm sure we could have a very long conversation over Fanon, because I must have told you before, there are lots of things about Fanon which I don't completely understand, and much that I understand I don't necessarily accept. Okay. Now, let me just come to the specific point that you were making towards the end about Black Lives Matter and how it was being, in a sense, appropriated by the more powerful lobbies in the United States and made to look like a good thing, and we have to accommodate this and so on. That argument. And what you were suggesting is that there is a response that Fanon would have to this sort of move. Now, I wanted to ask you the specific nature of this response, because it seems to be the one way of looking at Fanon's response, especially considering that he wants to extract this idea of a universal, a new kind of humanism, which is universal as well as revolutionary. But he wants to do it within the framework of a Hegelian sort of historical dialectic. And my problem is this: where would that humanism end up, except in essentially a liberal idea of equality, of equal rights, equal citizenship, etc.? How could it possibly be anything more than that? Because I think, because particularly as we all know, and you emphasized this, the influence of Sartre and so on, we know that in the 1950s, there was a certain way in which you might say, a kind of socialist universalism was projected, which was internationalist, which would ensure a kind of equal society, which capitalism had failed to do. Now, what I'm asking is today, so what? It is now 70 years or something after, 60 years after Fanon's death. What would this internationalist universalism, universal humanism look like? Let's say even in the context of Black Lives Matter.
Okay. Okay. So, Parthoda, I mean, I think if we were to imagine a form of a universalist humanism in its concrete form today, right? I think in the current moment, it can only take the form of a left populism, right? I really can't imagine what other alternatives are.
Let me point out something.
Yeah.
That left populism would necessarily have to exclude some people who would be identified as enemies.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So in this case, let us say white racists would be enemies. And that would be the politics. Now, is this, why is this any different from, let us say, if you go back, say 70 years to the days of, the last days of colonial rule, why is that any different from, let's say, the Algerian revolution is saying all we need to do is exclude the French colonial settlers from here, and we'll have perfect equality and universality. Why is that any different?
Okay, so now I guess because in left populism, the what shall I say? The object is, I completely get the problem which is there in left populism, as in discursively it does have.
Karthik, it's frozen. Your screen has frozen. Hello? I'll try and call him.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better now. Yeah, it had frozen. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, as in left populism does have some sort of similarities to, let's say, the anti-colonialist movement from the previous century. But I guess what is significant about left populism is that it does not try to homogenize its own constituency, right? So it does not try to say that there is this singular agent which alone can displace the oppressor, like let's say the proletariat, or let's say the colonized nation, or so on. Instead, it is willing to accommodate the pluralism of identities and political demands within its ambit, which it sort of places against the external enemy. But more importantly, I think a significant aspect of left populism is that it views the relationship between the people and the enemy, not necessarily in a manner which aims at the physical annihilation of enemy, right? So I think, in a sense, left populism is a sort of a rejection of Carl Schmitt's conception of politics as,
It's less violent.
Yeah,
it's less violent.
It's less violent. It's definitely less violent, right?
But then that would not be Fanonian.
Yeah, of course. But I think reading Fanon now would be more productive if we were to read him in this fashion. Because I think without placing Fanon in this sort of a theoretical framework which we can analyze the conflicts of today, I think much of what Fanon is talking is quite obsolete, right? And especially if we were to analyze something like the Black Lives Matter, some of the things which Fanon says in Wretched of the Earth would make completely no sense. Whereas something which he wrote much earlier, Black Skin, White Mask, makes perfect sense, right? So, which is why I think that when we try to bring Fanonism with a sort of a evolving framework of left populism, I think we can have a sort of a more productive and a sort of a more politically pertinent argument. And I also think that Fanon already has some sort of suspicion of the struggles of American blacks already being co-opted by the establishment, right? So in some of his writings, he just views that, he believes that why are these guys obsessing with race so much, and they are doing nothing to actually shake the fundamentals, right? So at some level, I think that Fanon is trying not just a sort of a mere opposition to white racism and white identity, but an entire reconfiguration of what it means to be black itself, right? So I think that is some aspect which is important, both for the Black Lives Matter to look at itself and for others to look at the Black Lives Matter now.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Karthik, there are quite a few questions lined up now in the chat, as you can see. You can see it.
Yeah.
So for those of us who maybe can't actually see the chat thread, the first one is from Ananya Mahapatra. Yeah, it says, can you give a little Yeah, can you elucidate
elucidate on the report which said that more blacks were.
by police
Yeah.
under Obama's presidential reign than under Trump?
Okay. Um, hmm.
And then
So
there's
yeah. So it would be hello. Yeah.
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it would be a bit. Hi Ananya, thanks for this. So it would be a bit tough for me to get this report out, but I think it was in the Washington Post. I'm just telling this out of memory, which said that there were more blacks killed by the police under Obama's presidential reign. But also let's remember that Obama was president for 2 consecutive terms, right? So perhaps this is a a total aggregate, and this actually couldn't actually mean much, and let's also not forget that if we look at the sort of foreign military interventions which happened under both presidents, Obama made more foreign military interventions than did Trump. In fact, Trump has actually been messing it up. So in a sort of a very, very, very broad level, I think one could say that more blacks and more colored people were killed under Obama than under Trump, right? Okay, so what about the Barshana Basu? Yeah.
Varshana Basu's question is, what do you think about constructive criticism of an ongoing movement? In Wretched of the Earth, Fanon does indicate that certain players who do not hail from the grassroots levels fixate on the pedantics while foregoing the immediate larger systematic biases being challenged. But both the BLM and the anti-CAA movements have drawn ire for being exclusionist, especially towards the queer communities. How do you respond to that?
Okay, so I think there is a part, this is why I said that we need to imagine a new form of left populism, right? So in my response to Patada, I said that the interesting thing about left populism is that it does not foreground or prioritize one single identity as being the main agent of history at this given point of time. It believes that a unity must be constructed by acknowledging and by admitting the plurality of identities, which is why the term people does not, I mean, the term used is empty signifier, as in which does not mean that, one particular nation, one particular race, one particular sexual orientation, or one particular class alone is the singular historical agent, but that several sort of constituencies can come together in this amorphous entity called people in a sort of an oppositional mode towards the elites, right? So I think this sort of this further expanding on this idea of left populism and exploring its possibilities could address the limitations of movements like the anti-CAA and the Black Lives Matter, which as you probably rightly pointed out, do not include the queer communities as much as they should. Again, further, Anvesha Ghosh.
Next question, Anvesha Ghosh. Could you talk a little about the difference between deployment of violence by state machinery and that of the disenfranchised, and why there is a greater stigma against the latter, assuming agency in the reclamation of their political space?
Okay, so again, I think this is a sort of a contextual question. In India, definitely, right? In India, I think the mainstream media disproportionately condemns the violence of the disenfranchised and is often silent on the violence perpetrated by the state machinery. For instance, I mean, there was this protest against Sterlite in the small town called Thoothukudi in Tamil Nadu, right? Now, the mainstream media largely condemned the excess of the protesters. They were throwing stones, they were, squatting for a long time, they messed up the roads and so on and whatever. But the police, in their repression of the protests, shot down 13 of the protesters. Apart from a few news outlets, hardly anyone covered this, or, nor was this a matter of condemnation either in the local media or at a national level, right? I guess this was a sort of a same response to the anti-CAA protest, where, the so-called, the CAA protest going out of hand was focused on, but police violence against it was not discussed to that extent, right? So in places like India, Sri Lanka, Burma, perhaps Pakistan, yes, the media does tend to disproportionately condemn the disenfranchised. But as far as the US is concerned, I don't think that's the case. Fox News is supporting Black Lives Matters. Can you imagine it? As in, Fox News is supporting it, Washington Post, New York Times. I mean, every major media house has supported Black Lives Matters. I mean, of course, there are qualifications. Fox News believes that, okay, Columbus was a bad guy, but you needn't have removed his statue. But they are not condemning the protest as such, right? So to some extent, it has been taken for granted by the establishment that in America, that, the protests, Black Lives Matters are legitimate and that they need to be accommodated, right? Which is why I believe that this protest needs to go somewhere beyond justice. Else, what this will end in is precisely what happened with American feminism, right? It sort of got accommodated, became a sort of an establishment clique, and the discourse of American feminism was used to justify American military aggressions in the Middle East, right? So one can also possibly imagine few years down the line, America attacking, God knows who, North Korea or Russia in the name of racial diversity. Highly possible with US. So anyway.
So Rajarshi, you don't want to come on the screen and ask the question? Should we just...
Yeah. Rajarshi, okay. Rajarshi has two questions. Split between particular. Okay, so Rajarshi's question.
You want to ask it, Rajarshi?
Yeah, no, he has said this. Okay. So now the thing is that, as in my research on identity politics, right? I believe, I take this Ezekiel line that an identity is always split into dual components. One, which is particular, which is unique to the person who owns or possesses that identity. And the other aspect of it is universal, right? The universal being something which others can relate to, others can also be a part of, and others can, what shall I say, empathize in solidarity, right? Let's just take the question of the Dalit identity in India, for instance, right? So when you look at it there are again dual aspects to it. One is a particular aspect where the term Dalit means someone belonging to the scheduled caste, someone who has faced untouchability, and someone who continues to endure that form of discrimination, right? That's a sort of a socio-cultural identity which a particular group of people in India endure. At another level, in the manner in which the Dalit Panthers envisioned it, Dalit meant all the oppressed communities of India, right? So basically, it's not just people from the untouchable caste, but also laborers, peasants, backward caste, women, minorities, religious minorities, and so on, which has a sort of a broader and more universal dimension. So it wasn't really an identity of caste, but of castelessness, right? Likewise, there's also this very, very nice aspect about the Haitian Revolution, right? Now, of course, we know that, Haitian Revolution, the French colonizers were killed and this, that, and so on, fine. But I think Toussaint Louverture has this speech where he tells that, even the Polish people in Haiti are black, right? So even the Polish people in Haiti are black, mainly because they see black not as a racial identity, but as a form of oppression to colonization, right? Now, I think just in that manner, all these sort of articulations of identity have both of these aspects too, right? The particular aspect, the universal aspect. Particular, what someone endures, very specifically questions of lived experience, lived oppression, and so on. And universal, which is of forming, going beyond your identity, having an expansive concept of identity, involving concepts of solidarity, shared struggles, and so on and so forth.
Karthik, if I may make an interjection here, Karthik. Karthik, I was more interested in your point as a philosophical movement.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when we think of Dalit identity as a more expansive concept, uh, what we have really is a new universal, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dalit emerges, so the what previously used to be a particular identity is now emerging as, say, with the with the Dalit Panthers and others, as a new
Universal.
universal identity, right?
Yeah.
So, as a philosophical movement, then, so we would have then particular identities, even in terms of the new universal identity. I mean, particular identities would be forged in in a dialectical relationship with the new universal identity of the Dalit.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? Because the emergence of new universals also creates newer forms of exclusion,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Right?
right.
I mean, because there was just, I mean, just in the previous question, someone had asked me about how, the anti-CAA and, Black Lives Matter excludes the queers, right? And perhaps, there have also been questions about how the queer movement in India have excluded lower caste. How lower caste movements in India have not paid attention to feminism or LGBTQ questions, I always think new forms of universals will also create new forms of exclusion. So that is a risk which universalism always has to take.
So basically, it is the dialectical movement that you were referring to. This is
Yeah. It's just a dialectical movement I'm referring to.
okay,
I'm
okay.
not advocating it as a value. I'm not advocating it as a value. I'm saying that this is a sort of a dialectical movement.
Okay. Thanks,
Yeah.
thanks, Karthik. And I have another question.
The other question is on theological. Yes. Okay. So I think the black movement in the US has been for a long time, as you rightly say, deeply influenced by theology, right? The current Black Lives Matter movement, I actually think that uh, it's a failure of theology, right? As in, I think it's a general failure of theology in America to adequately address these questions and have a sort of a spiritual resolution to them. Right? Now, there's the other question if theology has the adequate vocabulary to address these forms of injustices. But I seriously think that some forms of liberation theology in Latin America have actually functioned quite well, in addressing the gaps between the mestizos, the whites, and, the indigenous
It was
people.
in another historical era.
Yeah. So, and that's in a different context altogether. But in US, I don't think it has worked that well. So I think Black Lives Matter movement is also a response to a failure of theology to adequately address race. But for the matter, I think even the Nation of Islam hasn't done anything great either, right? Apart from provoking some sorts of deep forms of sectarianism, which ultimately led in the death of Malcolm X, I don't think the Nation of Islam adequately, addressed or was able to bring about positive changes in the lives of black people in the US. So I
No,
think,
the larger movement of the Nation of Islam, a lot of people have now joined mainstream Sunni Islam.
absolutely, yeah.
In fact, Waris Deen Muhammad leads one of the main sects of the Nation of Islam, which has completely mainstreamed itself with Sunni Islam. And
Yeah.
the legacy has, moved on in various directions. So,
Yeah.
So there are no other questions in chat that I can see. But does anybody else have a question? In which case you just need to unmute yourself and speak really, unless, So I'll unmute all just in case from my end anybody is. But often people are muted at their end, you know, so you'll need to unmute yourself if you want to participate. So are there any other questions? Any more questions? Karthik, can you see anybody?
No, has anyone raised a hand over here? No.
I don't see. Okay, so in that case, shall we call it a day? Is there anything else you'd like to add, Karthik?
Oh, sure. This is my book, Frantz Fanon, Identity and Resistance, available from Orient Black Swan. It's very, very cheap. I mean, it's just the price of a cold coffee on at Barista. Please get a copy and give me good feedback. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Karthik. I was going to show that book myself, but I got lost in the, you know, bookshelves. I just couldn't extract it in time. I thought I could hold it up. That advantage the screen really. So unless anybody else has a question, there were I think 21 participants at one time, and now we still have 18 left. I don't see any chat indicating that there are Kirsten. Okay, thanks. Nice to see you too.
Thank you. Oh, happy birthday.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Happy birthday.
Okay, so we'll call it quits over there. And just to announce before everybody goes that I will be issuing another notice for next week, next Friday, the 26th, when Rajarshi is going to be speaking. Rajarshi, can you just mention the title of your talk?
The talk would be titled Islamic Law and the Question of Decolonization.
Thank you very much. So I hope to see all of you again next week at Islamic Law and the Question of Decolonization.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Right. Thanks. Now let me try and get out of this.